I have a bit of a weird relationship with gacha games. I've been playing them for years and I've never minded their monetization models as I can typically control my spending. However, I always try to avoid telling people that I know to play a gacha I'm enjoying on the off chance that they can't control themselves and start spending money they either don't have or can't afford. However, if you're someone who's new to the genre and have gotten invested into Wuthering Waves, rather than convince you to stop playing if you struggle not to spend money, I thought instead I'd give you some advice on how you can hopefully manage your account and not feel so much FOMO. Now, I will admit I'm not free to play in Wuthering Waves as I do buy the Lunite subscription. However, I have played a lot of gachas and mobile games over the years, and in terms of gachas, for the vast majority of them, I have been a free-to-play player. Some I've been a light spender, but I have never been a whale. So if you either want to be a light spender or strictly free-to-play, I want to go over some things I've done to help control my impulses. First of all, even though there's so many different gacha categories out there, almost every single one is a resource management game. Your resources and how you spend them is responsible for not only how fast you can progress, but also how prepared you are for new content, whether that be new characters or endgame activities. When you're free to play, you should always be thinking about why you're doing something. For an example, having a single hyper-invested DPS character won't take you as far into endgame as having multiple DPS characters built that cover different elements. So if you're struggling to clear TOA and aren't spending your daily resources trying to invest into your teams to make them stronger, and are instead focused on trying to get the perfect echoes for your hypercarry DPS that will give you a 1 to 2% DPS increase, you're doing yourself a disservice. Unless you're trying to solo content, you will almost always not only see better DPS, but also more flexible team building by investing into both DPS and support characters rather than just focusing on perfecting your main DPS. The second suggestion actually starts outside the game. Ask yourself, why are you playing a gacha? Are you the sort of person who's going to get hyper attached to one character and are saving all of your currency to max them out?
Zapstring, it's our curtain call.
Are you a Pokemon fanboy with the desire to collect every single character?
Pokemon trick! It's Ash!
Are you trying to flex on whales by showing you can be just as strong as someone who's pumped hundreds of dollars into the game without spending any money? Or maybe you have another reason entirely. My reason I play gachas is for the variety. I can't think of another game genre out there that provides as much variety to the player as gachas do. Even Pokemon often have the same moves as other Pokemon, with a couple being exceptions having one unique move that only they can use. But gacha games typically have a boatload of characters, each with their own playstyles, animations, personalities, and ways that they can be used. That's why I play them. The reason knowing why you're playing a gacha to start with is important is one thing that I promise you will happen is at some point there will be something you regret doing. Whether that's pulling a character that you either didn't or no longer like, investing into a character only to bench them for something better down the line, punching yourself out in TOA or the holograms making you start to hate the game, or some other reason. However, if you figure out beforehand what you're looking to do in the game and what you're hoping to get out of it, the odds of this happening is a lot less likely, since you can start to develop strategies to make sure that you're playing the game the way you want to play it and with the characters or play styles that you enjoy. So once you understand why you want to play the game to start with, we can start to think about ways to manage our desire to spend money for every new character or weapon that slightly tickles our fancy. The most common time you'll get the desire to spend money is at the very beginning of the game, where you don't have a lot of options to choose from. The game does a great job at giving you strong characters that at the same time don't feel fun to play. Spectro Rover is a strong character, but is very boring to play. Chisha is another very strong character who is also kinda boring to play. Baija does a great job at keeping you alive, but doesn't really do much other than that. Yang Yang is kinda fun to play, but she isn't as strong until you get some of her sequences. And Senhua is a strong, kinda fun character, but if I remember correctly, you have to log in for 5 to 7 days before you can get her for free. Compare any of those characters at face value to any of the limited characters or even the standard 5-star DPS characters, you'll quickly start to get that desire to replace your starter character characters with something more flashy and fun. So for this reason, I'm going to give some tips specific to the beginning of the game. The best thing that you can do for yourself at this point is try out all the characters that you currently have and see which ones feel fun or good to play for you. Wuthering Waves is a very free-to-play friendly game, giving you some good characters that scale well into endgame completely for free. It also gives you both standard 5-star character and weapon selectors, a starter banner, followed by a 5-star character selector banner. This is a great start to a gacha game, and depending on how confident you are at learning to dodge and parry, would change what starter characters I would recommend you aim for. However, a general rule of thumb for Wuthering Waves, you have Rover and Chisha, both are very strong characters that will help you push into endgame. Then you have Senhua for free from the sign-in event. Yang Yang is a good sub DPS support, and last, Baija is your free healer. So the best pick from the standard banner is Verena, to give you that second healer for another team in Tower of Adversity. This is a decision that scales well even today, making Verena a good pick. So if you miss Verena on the beginner banner, make sure to pick her up from the standard selector banner, or if it's still available, the selector ticket. However, if you're a character collector, this might be hard to resist, but don't pull on the 5-star character selector banner or use the 5-star selector ticket until you have 3 of the 5 standard banner 5-star characters. This will ensure that you eventually get all 5 5-star characters. You could get super lucky and get all 3 of them early, or you could pull Encore 16 times in a row. It is a gamble, but this is exactly what I did, getting Calcharo from the starter banner, Jian Xin and Verena from losing 50-50s. I then used my selector to get Encore, and now the 5-star character selector banner is set to Ling Yang, but I haven't pulled him yet, which is because of a point that we're going to talk about after this. If the selector ticket is no longer available, then the same rule applies, but get 4 of the 5 5-star characters. For the weapon selector you get at level 45, the Sword Emerald of Genesis is easily the best choice. This is a very universal weapon, giving crit rate, good base attack, and a passive that works on all attack scaling DPS characters. If you plan to build Chisha though, you should also pull for the 5-star Guns Static Mist on the standard weapon banner instead of pulling on the standard character selector banner. They don't have the best passive for her, so a better weapon is likely going to come out in future. However, the base attack is worth it to increase Chisha's damage, and it also boosts the attack of the incoming character when you use an outro skill. So even if these weapons get replaced eventually, it's still a great support weapon for other characters like Mortifi. The other thing that you should do to make your account feel a bit stronger early game is give a full healing set to Baija with a Bell Echo, even if you don't need the healing. This will help your team do more damage by switching to her every 20 seconds to use the Echo skill and to heal. The next thing that you should always do early game is spend your stored stamina. You're gonna get a lot of these cubes called Crystal Solvents, and some people save these for when they get to a higher soul level so that they can get better rewards from their wave plates. However, if you spend them when you can, you will get to a higher soul level sooner, which will potentially let you push further into Tower of Adversity before its bi-weekly reset and earn you more premium currency. So unless you want to take your time and don't care about reaching endgame, you should typically use these up as you get them. Having said that, always do quests and dailies first to try and get as much soul level as you can before you use them. So those are my tips for the start of the game, and this leads me to my next point to talk about: how to manage your currency and how to pull for characters and weapons you want. We'll first talk about character and weapon materials, and then we'll move on to premium currency. When it comes to building characters, if you do a lot of world exploration and echo farming, and you have a strong AoE DPS character built like Chun-Li, Shang Liao, or Havoc Rover, try to run just them with 2 other characters that also need experience. The open world combat experience in this game isn't the best, however, it does provide enough that it can be worth trying to get some passive experience over time. When building characters, you should also level your DPS and some sub-DPS support characters to at least level 80, and pure support characters and healers to at least 60, so you can always unlock both inherent skills. Weapons for both DPS and support characters should almost always be leveled all the way to 90, as the weapon's main attack stat is actually base attack that any attack % current stat or buff will scale off. And second, the weapon substat will also increase, giving your character more stats to work with. There are of course exceptions to this, however a general rule of thumb, always level your DPS and sub DPS characters' weapons to max. This next part, I guarantee you there will be people who disagree with me on this, but echoes and forte levels are just as important as each other for increasing your character's damage. However, the method I use is I always do the cheap talent upgrades first to typically level 5 or 6. Then I focus on getting an echo set with some good substats. Then once I have a set, even if it sucks, I level my talents up to 10. And then after that, I can spend all of my time and wave plates on trying to get the perfect echoes. The reason forte levels take priority is the damage increase is guaranteed. So it's a much better use of time and resources than trying to get the perfect echoes first. The only exception to this rule is if you're planning to replace that character in the next month or two. Then the echoes are a better investment as they can be moved onto the new character, whereas the forte level investment is permanently for that character. Since we're talking about echoes, we should also touch on building echoes efficiently so that you can get the most out of your resources. If you're the sort of player that doesn't like farming echoes in the open world, so you only farm tacit fields with your wave plates, then you're likely going to be resource rich but echo poor. If you're the sort of player who spends 2 hours plus a day farming echoes in the open world, and you even jump into other players' worlds to farm even more echoes, then you're likely to be resource poor but echo rich. So a good way to manage your resources is gauging the amount of echoes that you have versus the amount of experience and tuners you have. If you have an overabundance of echoes, you can afford to level them up to +5 and then tune them once. If you get a good substat like crit rate or damage, then you can level it to +10 or 15. I typically go to 15. And if after that you have 2 useful substats, you can level it all the way to 25. If you don't get good substats, then feed them to the next echo and repeat the process. If you don't have a lot of echoes, but you have a lot of resources, you can level them to +15 and tune them 3 times. If you get 2 or more useful substats, then roll the last 2 slots. If you don't get at least 2 useful substats, then feed that echo to the next one and repeat the process. Now, there are positives and negatives to both methods. The first will drain more tuners and the second drains more experience. So I often settle for a happy medium and level them up to +10 and tune them twice, depending on how much resources I have. If I get 1 useful stat in the 2 rolls, then I'll level it to 15, and if that doesn't give me a second useful stat, then I destroy the echo. And that leads me to my next tip to save on resources. You can always keep echoes that roll like shit just in case for whatever reason you think you need it. However, the vast majority of the time, you'll want to get some of those resources from a shit echo back so that you can reinvest them into hopefully a better echo. However, if you have an echo at high level and feeding it to another echo will go over your level limit, whether that be 5, 10 or 15, rather than feeding it directly, go to your bag and delete it from there instead. This will give you back the same amount of experience that would have been fed into the other echo in raw resources. This does take more time to do, but ultimately it's worth it as it will also save you from spending unnecessary shell credits, and if the next echo also rolls like shit, then you won't be losing more experience that you could have been saving. Now, I would talk about how to spend your wave plates as well, but I would probably just be repeating myself with a lot of talking points we've already talked about. So instead, I will just mention that doing your weekly boss 3 times a week is important for getting more resources for your account in the long term. However, there are exceptions, like if you want to spend the week focused on getting nothing but echo experience and tuners, it would be much more worth it for you to just do tacit fields instead. Now let's move on to premium currency and using it to get characters and weapons. These should be the only things that you spend your asteroid on, since if you're free to play, you shouldn't be using your currency on wave plate refreshes. So if we're being honest with each other, you and I both wouldn't say no to getting at least one of every single character and weapon in the game. But as free to play players, that's not a reality you can rely on unless you get super lucky. So picking good times to spend or save is something that you should become familiar with as a free to play player. So when should you pull? This is going to stem from why you're playing the gacha game to start with. If you're a meta player, this is going to be hard in general since every 5-star character Kuro releases is likely going to have some purpose either currently or in a future team. So it's typically best to not only save for very strong DPS characters and their signature weapons, but also save your corals to hopefully get 1 or 2 of their sequences. As free to play, playing for both meta and character collecting are probably the 2 hardest ways to play a gacha game, as both almost require you to try and get every single character in the game. The best way to try and get around playing for meta is to only pull for hyper strong DPS characters, with good examples being Jinshi and Shangliao, universal supports, with the best example being Shorekeeper, and some other examples being Yinlin and Chun-Li because they both amplify an element and a damage type, and lastly, universal weapons with easy to proc passives and crit rate or damage substats, with some good examples being Verity's Handle and Emerald of Genesis. If a character needs a specific team to work, it's likely better to pull for a more universal character. If a support character hyper focuses on buffing a specific damage type, it might be best for certain teams, but I would personally wait to pull a character with more universal buffs. A lot of signature weapons work very well on that character, but most of them fall off when used on other characters because the weapon's passive is too restrictive. So instead, try to focus on getting weapons that give their full benefit to a variety of characters, which can make getting signature weapons upgrades for your account and not just a specific character. When it comes to waifu or husbando collecting, you can try your luck on every banner with a few pulls, but I would always try to keep some savings ready to get that one character I really want. Like I said before, this is one of the hardest ways to stay free to play, with it being even harder if you try to get your favorite character's weapon too, and my suggestion would be to always skip average characters and instead try to get them on their rerun if you have enough savings and if you still want them. In terms of what is an average character though, that's something that you need to determine on your own, as an average character for me might be a number 1 best girl for you. The way that I personally decide to pull is for multiple reasons. From most to least important, those are playstyle, solo capabilities, team value, and lastly, personality and animations. The last time I had to skip a character I really wanted was Jinshi. Not because I didn't know how strong she was or I didn't like her personality or the way that she played, but because we got to play Chun-Li in the story as well, I ended up enjoying her playstyle and animations a hell of a lot more, so I decided to skip Jinshi to get Chun-Li. The next character I could skip could actually be Camellia, depending on how she feels to play and if the next drip marketed character is a 5-star gun user. I only have Chisha built for ranged, and her kit is okay, but it's definitely not as cool as a character like Wanshi from PGR. So in my opinion, it's only a matter of time before we get a ranged character that feels badass to play, and that character is one that I'm starting to save for now. All of these things that I've just talked about applies to 5-star characters and weapons. When it comes to trying to get specific 4-stars though, I would never recommend summoning on a banner with a 5-star you don't want that has a 4-star you do, unless you're at the very beginning of your pity and you still have to win the 50-50. I would do 20 to 30 pulls and then I would call it quits. So some general rules for Wuthering Waves. If the current character banner is a character you really want and there's not currently a character you want more, then put all of your resources into it. If you only kinda want the character and you're at low pity, you can pull all the way up to the 50-50, and if you lose it, stop there. The reason you do this is you could get lucky and get the character early, but if you don't, you've still built pity to getting the next character that you really want. For weapons, signatures are always very strong on that weapon's character, but if the weapon's passive is restrictive to a certain playstyle, it's not worth it in my opinion. Don't ever exchange your asterite in the shop for pulling currency. You could accidentally exchange it for the wrong currency and there's no fixing that mistake, and if let's say you do a big bulk exchange and get the character early with currency left over, all of that leftover currency you converted can't be used on the weapon banner, so it's almost always a better option to just deal with the conversion prompt when you're summoning, as pure Asterite can be used on every banner. Now, we're also not going to talk about how to get currency, since it's basically just do your dailies, events, and Tower of Adversity every reset to save over time. But I will say, if you can't full clear TOA every 2 weeks as a free-to-play player, don't worry about it. As free-to-play, you're likely to have less options to use than light spenders and whales. So instead, don't stress if you can't clear it, and just try to get as much currency as you can every 2 weeks, while building up your teams and characters to hopefully push further next time. The last tip, if you're someone who cares a lot about what other people have and you compare what other people have to what you have, be skeptical of all the videos and screenshots that you see online showing either stats or damage. A lot of people just want to show off how cool their characters are and will not try to be dishonest, but will avoid mentioning some crucial information such as sequences, food buff, buffs from team members, buffs from holograms like Crownless. They could be doing a Tower of Adversity flaw that massively inflates their damage. And for some people, seeing this can make you feel bad about the characters and builds you have, as compared to the inflated values, you will be doing a lot less damage. Most people who can quickly do damage calculations, or you're familiar with the characters in the game, get to know what is and isn't possible. But some people tend not to dig that much and are willing to take everything at face value. A better version of this tip though is to stop caring about what other people have compared to you and just play your own game. So in summary of the video, and I'm going to list some things that I didn't mention in the video, since talking in length about more obvious strategies would have been a waste of everyone's time. No matter the genre, treat gachas like a resource management game. Figure out what you want out of the game either before you start playing or within the first few days. Unless you like to solo content, focus on building teams before hyper-focusing on main DPS characters. Leveling talents or forte skills are almost always a better investment over gear and echoes. Log in at least once a day and prioritize using your stamina and wave plates and doing your dailies. Keep an eye on events to make sure they don't expire, and at minimum do every objective that rewards you with premium currency. And for tips that are more unique to Wuthering Waves, pull for 5-star weapons over characters because they give much better base attack scaling than 4-star weapons, and 5-star weapons with crit subs are very helpful to make up for bad echo rolls. Depending on how much you farm echoes, be sure to spend your experience and tuners accordingly to maximize your resources. Doing your weekly bosses every week is good for your account long term in terms of resources, with a few exceptions. Once a week, the databank will reset, so if you have the time and you still need 4-cost echoes with the right main stats, be sure to farm boss echoes you need for characters, as each kill will be a guaranteed drop. And lastly, if you're at 0 pity, putting 10 to 20 pulls into a banner character you like, or going all the way up to the 50-50, is almost always worth it to try and get lucky. In gacha games, 90% of the battle with staying free to play is mindset. The last 10% is luck, since gachas are inherently RNG, so a lot of the time, your luck will determine how impulsive you can afford to be. However, that will do it for the video. I know there's a lot of things that we talked about that require you to work things out for yourself. However, everyone's goals, account, and situations, no matter if you're free to play or a light spender, are different. So general tips that everyone can apply to their account will work a lot better in the long run than me just telling you to follow a list of instructions and rules that won't work in every scenario. So I hope the video had some parts in it that were helpful to you, and as always, I hope you were able to enjoy the video. If you did, you can leave a like or a comment, and if you'd like to see more content in future, you can subscribe to the channel. But that will do it from me, so I hope to see you in the next video, and I'll catch you later.